Hopefully y'all can hear me. Welcome. All right. So welcome everyone. This is a webinar on the general waste discharge requirements for winery process water statewide order. We call it lots of things like statewide winery order, permit. So thanks for putting up with that. The focus today is on the Central Coast Regional Board, and I just wanted you to know that we're recording the presentation portions of the webinar. So just to refresh, this is a focus on the Central Coast. You're here. It's the start of our summer webinar series for the winery order, and we really appreciate your time today. We know everyone is extremely busy, and your time to engage is really important. A little bit about Zoom webinars. So this webinar is being run with a question and answer selection instead of chat. So you can click on that little call out with the question mark, and then a little pop-up will come up that shows you how to type in your question. You can send it anonymous or under the name that you use to log into Zoom, and then hit send. We're going to be going through those at the end of the presentations, but feel free to put your questions in at any time. With webinars also, you join as an attendee on mute with your video off. So just that's a little different than Zoom meetings. And then to leave the webinar, there's a little end icon as shown on the slide. So today we have quite a list of speakers. They're all from the Waste Discharge Requirements Program with the State Water Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Board in the Central Coast. So I'm going to go through the State Board speakers, which myself, Laurel Wardrop, I'm a senior environmental scientist. And then we have Jennifer Chen, who's a water resource control engineer, and Rebecca Greiner, who's an environmental scientist. And we all work heavily in WDRs as well as on this winery order. And then the individual speakers will be introduced at a later time, closer to when the Central Coast presentation starts. So today the flow will be what you're in right now is the State Board presentation component. Then the Central Coast region will go through more information specifically on the winery order implementation in their region. And then we'll do our live question and answer session. So before we get started on the winery order, I just wanted to back up a little bit and talk about the water boards in general. The water boards include the State Water Resources Control Board where I work, as well as 9 regional water quality control boards. Our mission is to protect water quality of the groundwater and surface waters in California. So we get confused a lot with other water agencies in California because like Department of Water Resource, which you can associate more with supply. Water board, you can think of us as the quality folks. And the reason it's so important is that the groundwater and surface waters have beneficial uses like swimming, fishing, supply, and that's what we're trying to protect. The regional boards are semi-autonomous, and they're separated geographically around the state, just like you see on the map. The water boards have a lot of authorities at the federal and state level for protecting water quality. And there's a lot of different regulatory mechanisms. Waste discharge requirements, or WDRs, are one of those. And the requirement to report waste discharge requirements, report your waste discharges to land, have been in the California Water Code for quite some time. And WDRs, they apply to thousands of different facilities in the state, and wineries are one of those. There's several regional winery WDRs that already exist, but today we're going to focus on the statewide winery order that was adopted in 2021. So all that to say, you know, the water boards between the state board and the regions, we coordinate heavily, many different programs. And the regions have a specific way of doing things, though, on their procedures and processes. They have specific authorities, and they implement their region-specific basin plans that apply to their geographic area. For the statewide order, the state board primarily does kind of the back behind the scenes implementation of the order, like the electronic notice of intent, we help support get that going. We give background on the order and the adoption and general information on implementation to wineries and so forth. The regional boards are more your direct contact for site-specific questions, and They review applications, they submit the comments to you on your applications, they issue the notices of applicability or the permits, and they oversee compliance, inspections, and enforcement. If you're not sure what regional board jurisdiction you're in, there's a water boards map tool on our website. There's a link here that will be live when we publish the slides that you can actually look up what regional board may apply to your site based on the location of your facility. Thank you so much. I'm going to now hand the presentation off to Jen Chen.
Thanks, Laurel. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jennifer at the State Water Board. Today, let's talk a little bit about why we're doing these webinars first. The Winery Order was adopted in 2021. We're in the implementation phase. That means we're actively accepting applications. We're enrolling wineries. Over the past few years, we've actually done a lot of outreach. We have presentations. We've sent letters to the wineries letting them know about the order. We have an eligibility survey online. And now we're doing these webinars. We also have more outreach coming up for later this year that we'll talk about in a little bit too. We've also been answering a lot of questions. A lot of times they're similar or the same questions sent to both the state board and the regional boards. We also recognize that there's a mix of the winery dischargers and a mix of experience levels. Some of you may be comfortable with the waste discharge requirements or WDRs. Since you've maybe gone through a couple of them. Many of you might be familiar with the water boards and their permitting process, but maybe not specifically with the WDRs. And some of you may be brand new to the program, to the water boards, the WDR program, and the winery order. So a big reason of why we're doing this, these webinars is to help get everyone on the same page and try to answer some of these more frequently asked questions. Next slide, please. The anticipated audience or our target audience really are the folks familiar with the winery's operations and that will be doing the actual implementation work, like the applications. For example, that could be the winery owners, the operators, and maybe for larger wineries or those with multiple facilities, maybe you have an environmental compliance officer. This also includes winery industry professionals like consultants and the winery groups. The goal is that we want to try answering these questions because the focus for these folks is probably on what do I need to do, when do I need to do it, what comes next, and also who do I talk to when I need more help. So another reason for these webinars is to help inform and prepare the dischargers and try to reduce some of the confusion around the order, and also importantly to provide you with resources. Next slide, please. So a question we get a lot is, don't I already have a permit? So the Waste Discharge Requirements Program, or the WDR program, we manage and issue permits and conditional waivers that are related to wastewater discharges to land to help protect water quality. The WDR program is actually only one of many programs within the water boards. So these are all separate programs and they each have their own water quality concerns. So for example, there's stormwater, irrigated lands, recycled water, and many more. A winery will actually need separate permits from all of the programs applicable to your operations. Next slide, please. The winery order is one permit within all the permits in the WDR program. So please keep in mind that there's actually not a winery program or a winery order program. It's the WDR program. The winery order was adopted by the state board, but it's implemented by the regional boards. It's a statewide general order, and that means that it's where the same permit can be used by all the regions for wineries throughout California. This is different from, say, a regional general order, where in that case, it would be a permit that could only be used by wineries within that particular region. So like Laurel was saying, the water boards, the state board and the regional boards, we do coordinate a lot on the winery order and through the WDR program. So like she was saying, the state board, really, we're here to answer general questions, anything that would apply statewide. And the regional boards are there to help, to really be the winery's direct contact, answer any site-specific questions, they review applications, oversee permit compliance, basically. So if you've actually emailed the state board mailbox recently, You may have noticed that sometimes we'll give you a detailed answer that answers your winery order question, but then we might suggest that you also follow up and contact the regional board because you might have a specific question related to your site or the region's process for doing something. So we do want to encourage you to start building that relationship too. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also get this question a lot. There's also variations of this. Where do I start? How do I get started? And the first thing you really want to do is take a look at the winery order. Try to figure out, am I eligible? Do I need coverage? And a big part of that is determining your tier. That's where you want to calculate, measure, or project the amount of winery processed water that you'll be discharging every year. And so when we say discharge, we're really talking about discharge to land. So that's processed water going into a pond, being land applied for reuse, maybe discharged to a subsurface disposal area. I also want to point out the word project because you also want to look at not just how much you're discharging now, but think about how this might change in the short or the long term. If you're still unsure if you're eligible or you just want to confirm, there's an online eligibility survey on the Winery Order website you can use to see if you're eligible. So when do I apply? If you're an existing winery without WDRs currently, apply now. If you're already enrolled either under individual WDRs or a conditional waiver, or maybe you're covered by a regional general order, you can either apply now or see what the date is based on your specific region's enrollment priority. If you've already been notified by the regional board to either apply or transfer over from an existing permit, look at the deadline in that notice that you received. If you're a brand new winery, you have to apply at least 180 days before you begin operations to get authorization to discharge your winery processed water. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about planning. What are some considerations that you want to think about as you start getting ready to apply and thinking about how the winery order applies to you? First, assess and gather information for your current facility, your current winery, your current site. Think about any changes that you have planned, any facility or process changes and their time horizon. For example, are you planning to expand operations? Are you planning to put in a new pond? So what we're talking about here are material changes. And a material change is anything that will change the character, location, or volume of your discharge. And the reason is because if you have a material change, this requires that you notify the regional board and submit a new application. So you have to decide for your facility whether you want to include all your plan changes into one application, or think about maybe it makes sense to submit a new application in the future. So for example, are you planning to increase production in 2 years versus 20 years? So these are things that you need to think about for your own site. Also think about, so now take a look at the winery order as it applies to your current situation. So think about the requirements that would apply from right now and think about how that might change after you implement facility changes. So for example, maybe you're in tier 2 right now, but after you increase production, you'll be in tier 3. So take a look at how those requirements would change for you. So a really helpful tool for helping you compare requirements, see what would apply now and in the future is to take a look at the compliance calendar tool on the Winery Order website. It's a spreadsheet, it's interactive, and you can use it to filter out based on your tier, like what features you have, like a pond or no pond, whether it's existing or new, and it'll show you the requirements that are applicable and their deadlines. Let's talk a little bit about how to enroll. So you've kind of figured out a plan and you're ready to actually enroll. So the application has 3 parts. There's the notice of intent, the technical report, and the filing fee. So please note that if you're an existing winery, meaning you began operations on or before the date the winery order was adopted, which is January 20th, 2021, you also have to submit a proposed compliance schedule. So that will lay out all the facility improvements or changes that you need to do to bring your facility up to full compliance to the winery order. We also often get questions about turnaround times, like when will I be enrolled? When will my application be accepted? And the short answer really is that it depends, since it depends on a lot of factors. But one of the goals of these webinars really is to also help improve turnaround time. So we're trying to give you more information and resources to help prepare and submit more complete applications to the regional boards. Also keep in mind that often applications will be missing something. It's pretty common, so look out for notifications or data requests from the regional boards, and please respond to those promptly. So all these things will really help reduce your turnaround time. Will help the regional board review your application, and once they determine that your application is complete, they can issue your notice of application or NOA. Notice of applicability or NOA, and that way it'll authorize your winery discharge. Next slide, please. Okay, so what if you have more questions? Where can you find more help? We really encourage you to start with the state board's winery order website. There's a lot of detailed information there. There's resources, there's tools, there's guides, there's links to things, and there's also contact information for both the state board and the regional board mailboxes. You can email the state board winery mailbox with your general questions, and email your particular regional board any questions related specifically to your facility or a region-specific procedure requirement. You can also reach out to external support. Maybe talk to other wineries in your area, winery or industry groups, consultants. And for example, there are a few, but not a lot, winery order requirements where you may need a professional certification or signature. Just keep in mind here that it would help if you're informed. So be informed, know your facility, get familiar with the requirements that apply to your site, and it'll really help you find the right help. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're narrowing in on the order. We've talked about the water boards, the WDR program, an overview of how to get started. And now let's take a look at the winery order itself. We're often asked, why is the winery order so long? Do I need to do everything part in it? And the short answer is that the winery order has a lot of flexibility. That's both by design and by request, because every winery does things a little bit differently. And so part of the reason the winery order is so long is because it covers multiple treatment and disposal options. It has requirement off-ramps, it has triggers. So there are some requirements that are not active right away, and they may never become active unless they're initiated. The order also has extended timeframes for planning and bringing your winery into full compliance. It's pretty rare, not impossible, but it's pretty rare and unusual for one winery where all the winery order requirements are applicable, because that would really mean that your facility has all the treatment disposal options in place, and somehow you've triggered all the additional requirements. So it's uncommon. Important thing to know is how the winery order is structured. The requirements all fall into these groups or dividers, and you can kind of think of them as like forks in the road. So your first and highest level split is your tier. Is your winery exempt? It's in tiers 1, 2, 3, or 4. Next, which disposal methods do you use at your site? So for example, if you have a pond, look at those requirements. If you don't have subsurface disposal, you can skip those requirements. Think about when your winery began operating. Is it existing? Is it a new facility? Are you applying because you're planning to expand something? Next, look at, are you discharging just processed water, or do you also plan to line apply your processed solids? So look at the appropriate requirements. There are also water quality considerations. So for example, there could be water quality results that could trigger additional monitoring or maybe additional reporting, like a salt or nutrient management plan. So if you think about these categories, it'll help you with the structure of the winery order. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the winery order. So you may have noticed that the order doesn't have traditional section or chapter numbers, and that's because it's structured so that each individual requirement has a unique identifier, so we can refer to that specifically. The identifier is made up of alternating letters and numbers, and each level is also indented. So depending how inset you are or how long the requirements are, you may actually have to look up and back a page or two. So here's one example. This is from the findings, and you'll see that the call out generally is winery order. They give you the page number, page 3, and you're looking at finding number 12, part A. And so just because of the structure of this requirement, when we call out part A, it actually includes parts I, triple I, and IV also, because it's part of the same sentence structure. Next slide, please. For this next example, I just picked one with the most sublevels I could find. So it's from the discharge specifications. It's on page 36. It goes from part D to part 1, sublevel A, down to II, down to C, and then sublevel 1. And so if you follow that path, that call out will point to this specific requirement. Okay, so let's, next slide, please. Okay, so lastly, let's talk about some tips for navigating the winery order. We don't really have the time today, so we're not going into the requirements in detail. The idea here really is to help you navigate the order itself. So the table of content is really the most useful piece, the most useful tool or piece of this order, and once you get more familiar with the order itself, the keyword search feature in the PDF also really helps, because once you kind of get familiar with the terminology. So I would never discourage anyone from reading the order from cover to cover, but it is pretty long. And today we're talking about how to get started. So let's highlight some of the things that I look at first. So the order is laid out into 3 parts. There's findings, hereby ordered, and certification. There's also a list of the tables kind of mixed into the order itself, and also a list of attachments that come at the end. The findings really includes background information, rationale, detailed descriptions of things. The hereby ordered section is really where it lays out what to do and what not to do, and what must be done. So for example, next slide, please. So if you take a look at the pieces in orange and the pieces in green, orange applies to everyone, green applies only if that's applicable to your site. So for example, your tier or your disposal method, your facility type. The ones I wanted to point out here are the applicability section and the application sections. Applicability is really where you want to go first. Find out if what you're doing at your facility makes you eligible for the order. It defines winery waste. It defines the tiers and the tier breakdown. It talks about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 exempt. That'll really help you figure out if the winery order is if you're eligible for the winery order. And the next section, application, talks about coverage. So it'll talk in detail about how to apply the pieces of your application, what enrollment means. So these are the 2 places I would start. And then if you wanted some background on what you have at your site, take a look at the green ones. So for example, you land apply, look at the application section. You don't have a pond, you can probably skip that section. Use the TOC to really help you get situated. Next slide, please. Here are so these are the requirements and specifications and prohibitions for your discharge. So the first section, discharge prohibitions. These apply to everyone, what not to do with your discharge. The green parts then start filtering based on your site. So for the first one, effluent limitations, notice it's only for tiers 2, 3, and 4. So if you're in tier 1, you can probably skip this. Same thing, the next section, discharge specifications are broken out. But again, if you only line apply, you can probably skip to that one section. If you're in tier 3, for example, look at that next grouping, the discharge specs for tiers 2, 3, and 4. Same thing. If you line apply, but you don't do the other things, skip to that section. And you'll notice that within that, so say you have a pond, you'll notice that within that pond category, when you get there, it's also split up by whether you're a new or existing pond, whether you have a certain pond liner or not pond liner. So really use those headings to help you narrow in on what you need versus being overwhelmed by having to read everything. There's also the provisions. Here you'll see requirements and also deadlines. So say you trigger some kind of report or a plan. It tells you what needs to be done and when it has to be done. Say you have to do certain requirements because you have certain features, like you do subsurface disposal. Again, it'll tell you in more detail what needs to be done and then there's a deadline. Lastly, if you look at the attachments, glossary really helps everyone. And then the other orange pieces point to the pieces of the application. And the last one talks about monitoring and reporting. The monitoring and reporting program really is set up the same way. So if you think of it where, like the technical report, it'll have a shorter list of requirements for tier one, longer ones for tiers 2, 3, and 4. Monitoring and reporting, same idea. Tier 1 has its own annual report format, and tiers 2 and 3 and 4 have another one. If you're in tier 4, you have groundwater monitoring, also another one. So really use the headings to figure out what applies to your site versus looking at the environment order as a whole and getting overwhelmed. So the takeaway here is just, really use the TOC to help you narrow in on what you need. With that, the next slide, please. Okay, yeah. So with that, thank you guys. And here's Rebecca, who will give a little bit more information on the application and enrollment.
Thank you, Jen. As Jen just said, my name's Rebecca. I'm also with the State Board, and I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail on some of the information that she had mentioned. Just as a little recap, so far we've covered looking at and navigating the winery order and its requirements, when to apply, and how to start planning for enrollment. Now I will discuss how to apply and where to get help if needed. Before beginning, if you're unsure whether the winery order is applicable, there is a self-guided eligibility survey available on the winery order website, and it's also linked here in the lower left-hand corner. Next slide, please. So once you've determined that the winery order is applicable, an application package must be submitted to begin the enrollment process. So the application package, as Jen had mentioned, consists of the notice of intent, the technical report, and fee payment. So submitting the electronic notice of intent, it's also called an e-NOI or an e-form, and submitting the technical report online are required. No paper forms will be accepted. So I'll go into a little bit more information on how that works in a couple minutes. And the last kind of step before the review by the regional board is to submit your application fee, which is equal to the annual fee, and those fees do change with the fiscal year. For the fee, there is a make a payment guide on the website. Please be sure to take a look at that, as it will help ensure that the payment will go through smoothly and correctly, which will greatly help expedite the enrollment process. And a signed copy of the notice of intent must be submitted to the regional boards. This is typically done once the payment has been made or is being made. There's important information regarding this step on our website contained in the help guide for the notice of intent. So please be sure to reference the help guide that will give additional information when completing the application package. Next slide, please. So once the package is submitted, the regional board will begin their review and reach out as needed. They might reach out for a number of reasons, but a couple common ones are asking clarifying questions or to request some missing information. Once the review is complete, the regional board will issue their notice of applicability, or also known as an NOA. The notice of applicability confirms the winery's tier under the order. If applicable, it will include an approved compliance schedule and it will also include a monitoring and reporting program. Compliance with this monitoring and reporting program begins after a notice of applicability is issued by a regional board. Next slide, please. So the enrollment process can be summarized in 3 pieces. First would be the submittal of a complete application package, the electronic notice of intent, technical report or other documentation, and the signed NOI with the fee. The second piece would be the review by the regional board, and third would be the issuance of a notice of applicability. Next slide, please. So the notice of intent must be completed via the California Integrated Water Quality System, or CWICS. As I previously mentioned, no paper forms will be accepted. It must be done online. A form ID, as shown here in the orange box, will automatically be generated with each electronic notice of intent. This number is important and will be used through the entire enrollment process, especially when it comes to fee payments. The 2 arrows in orange are highlighting the questionnaire and attachment tabs. The questionnaire tab is where you will include facility data, such as information relating to ponds or subsurface disposal areas, etc. And the attachments tab is where the technical report must be uploaded. Other supporting documentation can also be uploaded here as well. So shown on this slide is the E&OI help guide, as well as a link to the electronic notice of intent on CWICS. As a tip, while completing the electronic notice of intent, save each page and save periodically. Information on that is in the help guide, so you can take a look at that. Next slide, please. So the technical report is a required part of the electronic notice of intent submittal for all applications. If a technical report is missing, an error during the form completeness check will appear, and the option to submit the notice of intent will be unavailable. An outline of the technical report per tier can be found in attachment C of the order. Again, with the headings that Jen had pointed out, you can use the headings within that to find the pieces that are required for your facility. If there are any questions for your technical report, please reach out to the regional board. Next slide, please. So there is a dedicated winery order webpage that is kept updated with news, resources, and guidance documents. There are also other information and the ability to subscribe to an email list. We send out electronic updates through this email list. So shown here on the slide is the URL to the webpage, as well as a QR code that you can scan with your phone. Next slide, please. On our website, there are a series of tabs. The enrollment and fees, resources, and winery order contacts tabs have linked resources, and here is a list of the ones that are linked. It's suggested that you look at the tabs when you have a moment, as a lot of the information may answer future questions. So the ones that will help extremely with enrollment would be the notice of intent help guide and the fee payment or make a payment help guide. Both are found on the enrollment and fees tabs. Next slide, please. Shown here is the winery order contacts for the regional boards. This is the winery order contacts tab. It has the email addresses that should be used if you have questions related to that specific region or specific to your winery. Like Laurel had mentioned earlier, if you're unsure which regional board to contact, you can use the map tool linked here in the lower left-hand corner. For general inquiries, you can contact the state board. using the email shown on the contact slide towards the end of the presentations. But for specific questions, please contact the regional boards. And with that, I believe I will hand it off to the Central Coast Regional Board staff.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Give me just a moment to pull up our presentation. How's the volume so far? Okay. Does that look good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we're in presentation mode already? Okay.
I think you want to lower the attendees list.
Yes, I will do that. And I can even let me move this out of the way as well, because they don't need to see that. Well. Okay, is that better? No, I guess now we can't see ourselves. So Laurel, are you able to both see and hear us?
Yes.
Great.
It looks like the browser's being shared.
Okay.
If,
yeah, full screen. If I change to, whoops,
Open in app.
do I need to basically stop sharing and reshare? I think. So let's share, and then so just share this one maybe.
It's the same thing. You'll have to open this in the app instead of off the web browser.
Okay. Okay. Well, I can do that. Let me, in fact, if I go to it, I should be able to now say open and
Maybe
go up to the menu. And where do I get to it now? You gotta press the escape key. Oh, there you go. Awesome. How's that? Is that better?
looks good.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your patience with the technical challenges. You think by now we'd have Zoom completely figured out. So hello, my name is Jennifer Epp. I am the program manager of the Waste Discharge Requirements Unit here at the Central Coast Water Board. And one of the programs that our group does is the Winery program here at the Central Coast. So the presentation previously covered things statewide. Now we're going to zoom in and focus on things in the Central Coast. And you hear the terms Central Coast Water Board, Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, Regional Board. Those are all referring to these individual entities. Just for a little bit of context and overview of what we have left remaining today. We have about 20 slides and about 15 minutes. So if you can bear with us through the region-specific things, that would be great. One of the things that is somewhat unique about the Central Coast region is that we have had our own winery permit that covers wineries in this area for quite some time. And that hasn't been the case for other areas of the state necessarily, depending on where wineries are located. And so even though we have our own permit, we will be eventually transitioning almost everyone over into the statewide permit. That will take some amount of time. It's not going to happen right away because we have several hundred wineries here locally, but we will eventually be moving everyone over. And that's part of what you're going to hear more about today. And I will say, so we're located here in San Luis Obispo, but you can tell by the map that we cover several counties, approximately from the Santa Cruz to the Santa Barbara area. And so as many of you know, there's lots of great wine being made in this area. So those of you who are winemakers, thanks for making delicious wine, because we could drink wine from wineries just in the Central Coast and never get bored. So thank you. Next slide. So I'm joined by several teammates today who are going to be sharing the presentation. We've got Cecile Blancarte over here on my left. We've got Daniel Wadaragai here on my right. And in the middle, we have, I think the thing's blocking Rachel at the top there, sorry. And I have Rachel Hone here, which I can't see because of the Zoom slide. There we go. And also Corinne Watson, who's one of our student interns. And you'll see on the slide here that we essentially have different portions of the region divvied up where different staff will be working on applications from the different counties. And what we're going to go over here in the next approximately 15 or so slides is three things. We're going to talk a little bit more about the winery applicable permits, specifically talking about the Central Coast area. We're going to explain some of the common application errors that we have seen so far, help you learn from the mistakes that we've seen so far, and hopefully that helps get a more complete application in the first time. And then we're going to go over some next steps and resources. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Awesome, thank you. So to give an overview of permit programs, as Jen mentioned earlier, the water boards have a number of programs, and wineries within the Central Coast are subject to 3 different permit programs. So WDR is not to be confused with our stormwater program. Wineries that have construction for infrastructure that disturbs more than an acre of land would need to apply to our construction general permit, as well as the industrial manufacturing of wine subjects wineries to our industrial general permit. So that's separate through our stormwater program. And wineries are also subject to our irrigated lands program if growing commercial crops on site. So both of these programs, not to be confused with what we're focusing on today, which is waste discharge requirements. The winery order covers the generation of winery process water that's disposed of to land through beneficial reuse, land application areas, subsurface disposal, or to process water ponds. And your facility within the Central Coast falls into one of 4 categories. We have, as Jennifer mentioned, a regional-wide winery order that had 2 different components. So that's this bubble on the left-hand side of the screen. The Central Coast Regional Winery Order had a non-waiver and a waiver portion. For the non-waiver participants, you are producing more than 10,000 cases of wine per year. You've been paying annual fees and you've been submitting annual reports. There was also a waiver portion to cover smaller wineries within that for those producing less than 10,000 cases that did not have an annual fee associated with it, and there were no reporting requirements. And then your facility might just be unpermitted within the Central Coast. So if you are a new facility for the first time, or you haven't been previously enrolled in a permit, or perhaps your facility has been sold and has new ownership and the new owners need to enroll in a permit. Or finally, perhaps your winery has an individual permit or order. This only applies to a handful of facilities within our region. And all of these categories are being superseded, eventually will feed into our statewide winery order, which is even going to cover facilities that were previously considered waivers. So to highlight this, these middle categories, the waiver was a portion of our regional order. It was extended for 5 years, but has now expired and is not being renewed because it's superseded by the statewide winery order. And then unpermitted facilities, change of ownerships, these 2 categories, because those facilities do not have active permit coverage, they are required or were required to enroll in the statewide order by January 2024. So that deadline has since passed. And then these other categories, you have active non-waiver regional coverage. You are paying your annual fee and submitting reports, or you have an individual order also paying annual fees and submitting reports. These 2 categories do not need to apply for the statewide order until we direct these facilities to do so. You'll receive a letter in the mail from us giving you a deadline to apply to the statewide order. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Corinne.
Thank you, Rachel. So to provide a little bit more detail on our regional winery permit, currently it is split between the non-waiver and waiver portion, and the majority of the Central Coast wineries are enrolled in this regional order. It was divided by cases per year. So that means if your facility was producing more than 10,000 cases per year, that would be in the non-waiver portion, which included annual fees and reporting requirements. Whereas there's also the waiver portion, which was less than 10,000 cases per year, which did not include annual fees or reporting requirements. The biggest difference between the regional winery permit and statewide order is our regional order is based off of case production per year versus the statewide order is based off of annual flow in gallons per year. So the waiver portion of this permit has since expired, and facilities that were enrolled in the waiver portion no longer have permit coverage. So that leads me to my next slide, where big picture, as a big picture takeaway, we'd like to emphasize that your facility is currently unpermitted if the facility was enrolled in the regional waiver, or if the facility was sold and the new owner hasn't applied. So this includes changing names or changing ownerships without submitting a new permit application. Lastly, if the facility is new or a proposed build, that also qualifies as an unpermitted status. Now we're going to move forward into some of the common application errors we have found while processing the applications we have received thus far. The first of which is an inaccurate tier determination. So wineries under the statewide order will fall into tiers 1 through 4 based on the annual processed water flow production in gallons per year. Tiers 1 through 2 are able to provide an estimated or a calculated flow, but we have seen some calculation errors with these calculated flows. Currently, the Central Coast Water Board utilizes 2.4 gallons of wine per case and 5 gallons of processed water per gallon of wine, which results in about 12 gallons of processed water produced per case. I'm now going to pass it off to Rachel, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the common application errors.
Great. We've received a number of applications thus far, and we're noticing of those applications, applicants are not including an FDF sample. So for tiers 2 through 4, facilities must compare winery effluent, fixed dissolved solids, or FDS concentrations to an FDS threshold in order to determine if additional measures like salt and nutrient management plans are required. So applicants, when you submit your application, you must submit a representative FDS sample for the source water and processed water effluent. And with that, I'll hand it over to Daniel.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll be speaking about some more common application errors that we've seen from the applications we've received so far. One of the common application errors we've seen is not including an application ID on a payment method. Each application in Civics has a form ID number, which is used to identify the application and associated fee. The form ID number is required to link an application with a payment process. If paying via check, applicants are required to include the form ID number on the check. As a reminder, if you are making online payments through the electronic funds transfer process, you must use the form ID number provided with facility enrollment to ensure a complete application. Another common application error we've seen so far is applicants cited an incorrect name for a facility owner. The facility owner name is a legal business name registered with the Secretary of State. For example, if Two Winery Brothers LLC is a registered business that owns Best Wine Winery, the facility owner name while completing the application should be Two Winery Brothers LLC. Similarly, we often find that application has been incorrectly signed by the wrong official. The application must be signed by the legally responsible official or an authorized representative of the legally responsible official. Many of our Central Coast wineries are owned by LLCs. For LLCs, the person signing the application needs to be either a member or a manager given signing authority by the operating agreement of the LLC. If someone who meets the criteria listed here wants to authorize someone else to sign the application on their behalf, they need to provide us with a signed authorized representative form.
All right, thank you, Daniel. I'm Cecile, and I will be talking about
omissions that are often seen in the applications that we receive. And there's about 7 more common omissions in the applications. And I'll start out with the site plan. Most important, the site plan is, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And a lot of our permits are based, the information is found on these site plans. So please ensure that you provide the crush pad areas, any surface water bodies, groundwater monitoring wells, water supply wells, on your site plan. Another feature of the site plan that we'd like to see is understand where stormwater lands on the facility and at the points where that stormwater may commingle with crush pad wastewater or leachate. We definitely need to understand where those locations are, any ditches, drains, and how the facility is managing them. Also, one more thing is the location of your solids, which is your pomace and your leaves. It is possible to use these as beneficial reuse. We just want to understand where you stage them and where they're going to be used. Next slide. Thanks so much. A common feature of wineries is some subsurface disposal of the wastewater that's generated there. Definitely provide as much or all the information that is required in the permit. It does give a detailed of their design requirements. Provide that information for us. Many wineries will find in reading the permit that they will not automatically meet the affluent limits or design criteria. And so providing a compliance schedule with your application is really key. So water board staff understands your plan on meeting those compliance requirements. Depth to groundwater is another common omission in the applications. And when we talk about depth to groundwater, we're talking about first encountered groundwater, not groundwater that's, levels that are found in your ag irrigation well or your water supply well. So you may have to get a backhoe out there and dig down 20 feet, see if you find any groundwater, but we definitely understand where first encountered groundwater is, especially at the point of where your percolation ponds or your subsurface disposal systems are. And then CEQA determinations is really a complicated one. It just all depends. And we do have an FAQ on how to check those boxes. And my colleague here, Corinne, is going to talk more about your FAQs.
Awesome. Thank you, Cecile. So moving forward, there are some next steps and available resources. So in efforts to answer some of the common questions and provide more simplified instructions, the Central Coast Water Board developed a simplified guidance document. This includes county-specific contact information. So depending on the location of your facility or the winery, there is a county-specific contact, which is detailed in the FAQ and guidance document. Furthermore, it includes step-by-step application and enrollment instructions, as well as exemption parameters and steps for validating your facility's exemption. Lastly, the document includes links to all of the winery-related State Water Board and Central Coast Water Board resources. And this document can be accessed using the QR code or the link below the QR code. Now, moving forward into the regional board's efforts for enrollment, the regional board will be directing facilities to enroll in phases based on the relative size and process water flow of the facility. Earlier, Rachel explained that for facilities that currently have a valid winery permit with us, or have an individual permit, that you are not required to submit an application until we notify you. So on Tuesday, earlier this week, we mailed letters to about 65 of our larger wineries directing them to apply. We wanted to give facilities significant lead time and not have applications due during the busy crush season. So the deadline to submit an application is February 1st of 2025. We will be directing smaller facilities to enroll at some point in the future as we make progress on these larger facilities. And as Rachel mentioned, this process of waiting for a letter from us only applies to facilities that currently have a valid permit. If your winery is one of the previously discussed unpermitted facilities, your deadline was January of 2024. Please feel free to send us an email to validate whether you have a currently valid permit or not. I'm now going to pass it back to the State Water Board for some concluding remarks.
Thank you. All right, so real quick before we get into the Q&A, and thank you for getting your questions started in there. We are looking at those and putting them in order, so really appreciate it. So just real quick, heard a lot of information today. You know, here we are from the water boards. We're going to keep doing this outreach for the summer through these webinar series. I hope you join us for some of the other regional board ones. We will definitely be posting the recording of each of these presentations as well as the slides. So I'll mention that later too. And then this winter we might be doing, we're planning to do more outreach for wineries that currently don't have any WDRs for winery waste. So those existing wineries that had a deadline of January 1, 2024 that have not started enrolling, we're going to be doing another set of outreach to those facilities. So there's generally 3 buckets that existing wineries are in. So some of them are already enrolling. They're starting that process in the order, and they're really looking at that application information development and actually working with the ENOI that Rebecca talked about. And, you know, take note if you're in Central Coast of all the information that Region 3 just shared with you on common mistakes. They're also planning out, okay, if I'm applying for this, I'm going to have to do it. And so the monitoring and reporting compliance, how are you going to do that? And planning out your facility upgrades to comply. Like Cecile mentioned, you're not going to have to do it all on day one. It is a process. Then there's the other bucket of you're an active winery, but you have WDR. So what are you doing? Note that deadline that Region 3 just mentioned. If you've gotten a notification to enroll, they have an expected deadline that you meet that, and reach out to them. They've given you a lot of information today, but consulting the regional board and actually putting the recommendations and requirements from the region into your application will definitely expedite the process. Last but not least, there is a 4th bucket or a 3rd bucket. It's the active wineries that have coverage in the statewide order already, and they're in implementation. You know, they're actually implementing their facility upgrades. They're doing their monitoring. They're developing their reports, and they're going to be submitting their facility-specific monitoring results now, or potentially some that really enrolled early might be doing that very soon. So there is an error in the table of the actual order for the annual report and second semi-annual report due date. It is April 1st. So it's not, we're giving you the longer time period, not March 1. So just note the deadlines for your different reports. The annual report's due April 1, but depending on the tier you have, you might have additional reporting. You might have a streamlined report for tier 1. And then also just note if you are enrolled that the monthly compliance letters are required for all tiers. And as Rebecca mentioned, we have a lot of resources on this on our website, and we're working on an annual report template in the future. So with that, this is your time. Thank you so much for, listening to us.